Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Talk Junkies, where today is going to be a very interesting day, as it is each and every single week here at Talk Junkies. If you're interested in the last podcast that I did, it was with Caprice Lee. She's an author of 2 books. She just came out with her second book. I don't have it on me. I still need to buy it. It was a fantastic podcast about homeschooling. She does a deep dive into why public education is failing, American kids, and how it might be a better choice to homeschool. Now, that's a very tough question to ask yourself when it comes to teaching your own kids. But Caprice has a website, capricelee.com. She has a lot of valuable resources on that website to help guide you on that journey with your children and homeschooling them. Today, we're going to have a gentleman who's been on Talk Junkies twice before. He's an author of the book called The School World Order, and he's just a fantastic guy. He has a lot of wealth of knowledge, and not only with his knowledge, he backs it up with references and resources. He looks at it from both sides of the coin, and he's just an honest guy. Cool guy, and I'm glad to have him on. John, thanks for joining, brother. How you doing?
All right, man. Thanks for having me back. It's been a while.
It has. Thanks for coming on, man. So what's been going on lately with you, man? I don't know if you want to get into that at all, or if you just want to hit the podcast, or just, I think the last time we had talked, you're not teaching anymore, or is that something you're still not doing, or?
Oh, no. I've stayed teaching, but I've stuck online. I didn't get my jabby. So one of the things, well, first they grandfathered everybody in because everybody was locked down. So they let everybody go online. And then, let's say probably mid 2021-ish, they started to bring everybody back. And I had a feeling that was going to dovetail with the issuance of a mandate for the jab, which is what happened. So I never went back because I saw that coming. It was funny. It was actually, it was either late summer. I want to say it was actually early fall semester when the governor of Illinois mandated the jab. And so it was like right when the semester started. So I watched that and just been staying online. And technically the mandates are no longer in effect, certainly not in the state of Illinois. I'm pretty sure not federally anymore at this point either, for the time being, but I still was not and am not comfortable with going back until there's some sort of legislation, a bill that explicitly says that they can't roll it back out. And lo and behold, I'm sure we've all heard some of the speculation about the resurgence of another variant and the possibility of new mandates coming back. That doesn't seem to have picked up the momentum that a lot of people speculated on, but it's, it at least kind of popped its head up a little bit, which suggests to me that still not comfortable with it. So I'm online at different schools, and that's just kind of how I'm kind of treading water there. It's kind of my judo move. I mean, I have to feed the data monster, but I'm still employed, and I can at least teach some classical rhetoric to the students that take my course, and they can read Brave New World if they're in my 102 course. So I can at least get them some information they otherwise probably wouldn't get.
Rock on, man. Yeah, I was curious how that was going to work with the state of Illinois. I'm surprised that they were even lenient on the mandates, but at least you're still teaching, man. You're still spreading knowledge to people, and that's a good thing. Kind of today, what I want to just kind of briefly just get into, just starting off, is you talk about in your book in the first couple chapters from cradle to career. And I'm very curious because the last podcast I had with Caprice, this almost goes hand in hand with that. You see the education system, and it almost suggests that, and I think it's obvious, and people who can't see past it, it suggests that what they're creating is workers, lab rats, people who can perform manufacturing jobs, keep the well-oiled machine going. Can you kind of just tell me what is cradle to career?
So that's a sort of a buzzword that was created by a guy by the name of Jeffrey Canada. And Jeffrey Canada, he started something called the Harlem Children's Zone. And it's sort of a nonprofit alternative education model that it largely focuses on what's known as community schools or community schooling. But he also developed 2 charter schools based on the HCZ, or the Harlem Children's Zone models. And I believe they're called Promise Academy is the name of the charter schools. And so his idea was that through various public-private partnerships, either through community school partnerships or charter school partnerships, so I should probably explain the difference between those first. So the charter school is basically, it's a private company that provides educational services, but is subsidized by public tax dollars, whether state or federal. A community school is technically still a public school. Okay, so the charter school doesn't actually have an elected board. It has a corporate board that's appointed by the people that run the company. The community school still does have an elected board, but part of what makes it a community school, and in particular, if it's what they call a full service community schooling, as stipulated under the Every Student Succeeds Act, they have to have what are known as pipeline services, or otherwise sometimes known as wraparound services. And these are going to be public-private partnerships between the public school and other private companies that are going to facilitate either workforce training, so funneling the students through career pathways into in-demand industries in the local area, or other public-private partnerships to help with the students' healthcare outcomes, so partnering with other private healthcare institutions. And then they'll also have some what are known as community-oriented policing services that try to mark children or students who are like at risk for becoming falling through the cracks, etc. And so the community schooling model is supposed to, in the way that it was designed by Jeffrey Canada, was largely designed for impoverished neighborhoods, and it was his goal was that through these various public-private partnerships, by sort of integrating all these other industries and services into the school, that you could lift not just those students out of poverty, but over time you could lift the neighborhoods themselves out of poverty. So to help facilitate that, he started to create these Promise Academy charter schools. And then actually in the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was signed in by President Obama, there are initiatives or grants facilitated for what are known as Promise Neighborhoods. And so these Promise Neighborhoods grants are basically designed to give money to those types of community schooling, charter schooling services that are developed based on the HCZ Promise Academy model.
So when you say that, and all this money's being funneled, and it's supposed to be helping and bettering people and communities and lifting those neighborhoods up, or one student at a time type of thing. Since you've written the book, have you seen any of those programs do that?
I did an interview with, or Daniel Eschelin interviewed me about a month ago. Never posted it for some reason, but he asked me that very same question. And my answer is no, I have not. Okay. Is the short answer. Yeah. I mean, in most of these initiatives, this is sort of the latest in the cradle to career buzzword. Before that, we had terms like school to work, or just workforce schooling, workforce training. And these have been embedded in the community schooling model. Actually goes back to the 70s. So, and there were some pilots that even earlier than that, late 60s-ish. And, the goal was always that it was going to improve the plight of students, whether in terms of workforce outcomes or just educational outcomes generally. And it just tends to be the case that all of these programs, not only do they not actually achieve the goals that they purport, they often seem to exacerbate the problem. And sometimes, you look at that and you wonder how that can be so, because any other business model, right? I mean, if you're doing something repeatedly and getting the opposite outcomes, right? At some point you do a radical overhaul, but it seems that the failures of such programs are often used as the impetus or sort of the evidence that we need to ramp up the same type of programs. And it's hard not to infer that therefore the intended aim is sort of for lack of a better term, a controlled demolition, right? Just a restructuring of the nature of the schooling to facilitate workforce planning outcomes for the benefit of companies as opposed to the neighborhoods or the children themselves. I honestly don't know any other way that you could logically look at that continued process and assess it any differently.
So it's almost as if it's working, and it's working the way that they want it to work, and they're just throwing money at it to make it seem like they're doing something about something, which really isn't the case.
Yeah, again, right. So, I mean, again, the main thing here is sort of just the main objective, it appears, is the thorough integration of all sectors of the economy for the purpose of a planned economy, centrally planned through public, private, corporate, government partnerships, right? And so then whatever sort of eggs get broken in making that omelet is just, part and parcel for the course.
Yeah. So when you and these programs exist, they're still going on today. I don't know. I'm really not aware of new ones that they come out with or currently what's in the works. But when you see people like Bill Gates and other rich people or people who are very wealthy involving themselves and donating money to these charter schools, that to me that rings alarm bells, or it's a red flag that they're even involved in that. You would say it's philanthropy, and they have so much money they don't know what to do with it. And why not give back to education? Why not give back to the kids? Bill Gates is so good at doing that with vaccines and education, as you state in your book. What really is their hand in public education? Is it so sinister, or is it just help the kids?
Well, I mean, so the whole Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, their philanthropic investments in education is just sort of the contemporary iteration of a process that began in the mid to late 19th century, starting with such nonprofits, some of the first tax-exempt foundations, such as the Peabody Education Fund, Rockefeller General Education Board, Carnegie Advancement for Teaching, and from the get-go, they have pretty much always been involved in sort of transforming the compulsory education system into an engine of workforce training and workforce planning. So, as far as the Gates Foundation, that's it's been a while since I actually am doing it's about halfway done. So I'm doing a lecture series through Richard Grove's Autonomy University. And so if you want sort of like a crash course lecture on my book, you can go there and you can get that course. And so I did brush up on some of the earlier chapters. But as far as the Gates Foundation, it's been a while since I looked at the grants, but I know I went through many grants that were handed out by the Gates Foundation, and pretty much every chapter in that book, they pop up in some regard or another. So they've been involved in financing Promise Academies, or rather Promise Neighborhoods, just charter schools in general, various cradle to career initiatives, career pathways initiatives, some of what are known as P20 or P16 councils, which are state level. They're basically clearinghouses for various public-private partnerships of the various varieties that I've already laid out. And then we can also look at some of their investments in adaptive learning courseware and some of the ed tech, but that's sort of going to take us slightly away from the topic of sort of charter schooling and community schooling. But in all these instances, what's the common thread is sort of the development of the 21st century workforce, which is necessarily one that is fully integrated into what's now known as the fourth industrial revolution. So in other words, it's not just the facilitation of a planned economy, but in the instance of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right, the facilitation of a planned economy that's going to profit big tech companies like Microsoft, which he owns. So you could see it as sort of just a longer plan for social engineering that stems back well over a century. But you could equally look at it as just sort of a way to take their profits, put it into a tax-exempt foundation where they don't have to pay taxes on that. And then by spending that money back into the economy in ways that basically reinforces their profits and basically funnels that money and the workforce back into their own advantage, you could just look at it as sort of a profit motive. But if you look at the trajectory of the involvement of tax-exempt foundations, nonprofit corporations in education, going back well over a century, there's clearly a broader social engineering agenda aside from just the profit motive.
Yeah, so they can have their cake and they can eat it too. So they're able to. It's insane to me how they have that much of a grip on something so important, where they're able to make a profit and then in turn just be able to create a workforce so that it can continuously make them profit for generations and generations. That's insane. I mean, it's brilliant, honestly, and we allow it to happen, and that's even crazier. But I mean, we have people like you who write books about it and expose it, and it's just not enough. We've passed a point of allowance, and I don't know if there's any turning back, John. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, these last 3 years has been pretty crazy. They definitely are going for a great reset. I mean, not just rhetorically, but I mean, even if Klaus Schwab didn't write that book, they didn't use that phrase, you'd probably just colloquially call it something similar anyways. Honestly, there was an interview that I did with Ed Opperman. I did a few of them. And a couple times the audio was messed up. I still have a copy of this audio. Maybe I'll post it on Twitter just to put it out there, but you can hear it, but it's like popping and crackling the whole time. But he sent it to me anyways, never posted it on his channel. But he asked me something to the effect of, this was shortly thereafter lockdowns. And I used the phrase, I said, this is the global reset. This was before I think the Great Reset was announced. I want to say June or July-ish, around that year. Because I remember it was right before I did my first interview on Jay Dyer's Jay's Analysis. So and I'm pretty sure that was in like June or July. I'd often heard similar phrases sort of tossed about in people that sort of estimated what the trajectory of sort of the goals of the New World Order. And that it was just perhaps prescient that I used that phrase shortly before Schwab called for his Great Reset. And yeah, I mean, all I've been able to really suggest in terms of some sort of method to perhaps steer us somewhere away from, or at least under the radar of, this encroaching global technocracy is to create some sort of parallel structures, largely, at least in the realm of education, through homeschooling, basically getting out of the government schools and avoiding the virtual charter schools, which would be the online virtual schools that you would basically be bringing in the public-private partnership to your home. Trying to build some sort of network of co-ops or pods with like-minded families and neighbors, and hopefully that can pick up its own momentum and maybe can sort of culminate in some sort of a parallel system that can either exist in opposition to, or at least separate from, or otherwise under the radar from this whole fourth industrial revolution system.
Well, I guess in this aspect, it makes me wonder, and I'm curious what you think about it, is obviously with COVID, they didn't try. Every student was virtually taught for a good year. There was no people in class. I'm sure there were like private schools that still were in session, but public education was shut down. You were learning from home. And I almost think that and you saw that there was a lot of pushback from parents because they created a system where now both parents have to be at work to make money, to fuel the system, to fuel the lifestyle, or even to have a home and put food on the table. You almost have to have both parents working now. So they created the virtual teaching through COVID, but then you get pushback from parents saying, hey, we need our kids back in school. So do you think they're going to be able to find a balance of where they'll still be able to teach kids virtually in school? I don't know. Does that make sense, that question?
Who do you mean when you say they find a balance? Do you mean the parents, or
No,
do you mean the school?
just the system, the beast, whatever it is you want to call it, because they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, like we talked about in other instances, but they can't have kids learning from home because the parents have to be at work working. You know what I'm saying? If you virtually teach them at home, you no longer have a babysitter, essentially, I guess.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, and I have seen some anecdotal examples of parents that being one of their complaints about the homeschooling is that, right? It's sort of in many ways unwieldy. I would say that the long-term goal is ultimately going to be that the bulk of the learning is going to be through a device one way or another. And that could be that it could be what's known as the hybrid learning system. So you have a fully online system, which is when you'd be, right, basically learning from home all the time on your device, online through some sort of learning management systems known as an LMS, some other digital platform. Or then they have what's known as the hybrid learning, and the hybrid learning is where you're going to alternate back and forth. So you're going to be either 3 days at school in a brick and mortar building, and then 2 days online, and then the next week you'll invert that, so you'll have 3 days online and 2 days at home or at the school. But then they also have what's known as the blended learning model, and the blended learning model is where you're in the school 5 days a week, but essentially everything you do is facilitated through a device, whether it's a tablet or a laptop. And the teacher is just going to sort of monitor what you're doing on the computer through a dashboard that they have at their front desk, so they can just sort of remote into your computer, or at least look at the analytics, right? What module are you working on? What progress are you making, etc. So it's going to be one of those models. In other words, technology is not going to go away. I would wager that long term, the goal would be to have as much of it done online in your own home as possible, and that goes for work as much as it does for learning as well. I know there's a lot of companies that want people to come back to the offices, but the longer we sort of are in this precarious scenario, both economically and with the sort of the constant omen of a potential lockdown or new variant sort of hovering over everybody, there's going to be more and more incentive for companies to not just save money by not having to pay for office space, but not have to deal with the potential, we have to basically upend everything to facilitate, a time frame of lockdown, remote working, remote learning. So I would wager that, and this would integrate perfectly with the community schooling system, which would be that the only time that you really go to the brick and mortar building is to use one of the wraparound services, right? And so whether it be for healthcare or a mental health checkup, or maybe a jab clinic, or some sort of intervention for a student that perhaps based on his online analytics, is considered to be at risk for some sort of delinquency, or maybe, the degree that your career pathway puts you on course for a job that does require some sort of on-site labor, that you would do some internship or some sort of career pathway. training on site, but the bulk of the actual coursework would be online through one form or another. So, for the parents that are not, it's not conducive for them to be at home necessarily monitoring the computer all the time, or monitoring the children all the time. That could sort of be that inconvenience can sort of be pushed aside as the parents' work becomes increasingly remote as well.
That makes complete sense. I didn't even think about that point, because that's eventually what we're leading to as well. But in saying that, and isn't this was just inevitable for this to happen, for us to put ourselves in this position and allow technology to progress the way that it has, and it's progressing so fast that we can't keep up with technology as human beings, and we're allowing these types of things to happen. Don't you think it was just inevitable, or did we just abuse technology and allow it to overtake our lives and put ourselves in this position? Because, John, I don't know about you, man, that seems like a scary world for me, where we're not interacting with each other. We're literally just on devices, tablets, whatever you want to call it, day in and day out at your house, not getting out, not being in public, and having conversations with people. That just seems like a scary world. And do you think that's the future of our world?
Well, so I think there's two answers to that question. And one of the answers is that if you're talking about on the consumer end, or the workforce end, or just the regular working American end, or working human end globally, so we kind of, right, to the extent that we sort of sleepwalked into this, with every new convenient, fun little gadget, we started to use them more and more, and not just use them more and more and, effectively become addicted to the stuff, but to integrate our social lives through the devices, to integrate our jobs, our shopping, right? Like every aspect of the human condition, right? It's not just that we had these fun devices and, to play games or something, right? Like we've very much integrated almost every facet of life into the device. And much of that was done sort of without thinking about the trajectory of where it was going and what could be the potential implications of a day when something like a lockdown happens, right? And or a day when we start getting debanked or deplatformed, and suddenly, right, it's not just this convenient thing where you sort of streamlined all your contacts and all your activities onto this mobile computer, but now you're dependent on it, right? And the moment that somebody for whatever reason maybe deplatforms you or something, you have an online business, or in the instance of a lockdown where you're stuck on this thing whether you like it or not, that in many ways was, we all built that system, some perhaps more than others. Like I personally never had a social media until I published my book, which was only about 4 months before lockdowns, and I got my social media purely for the purpose of getting it out and disseminating it, etc. But on the other end, if you're talking about sort of the architects of the system, they theoretically saw the trajectory of this going back at least to the Macy's Cybernetics conferences in the late 40s, early 50s, spanning that time frame, when you had people like Gregory Bateson and Norbert Wiener and other cyberneticians, building on sort of some of the theoretical frameworks of people like John von Neumann and Alan Turing, and just sort of theoretically understanding that, right, if you can quantify everything in terms of a binary code, and you can create a system that can not just quantify it, but create a feedback loop where it can sort of track it in real time and can sort of make adjustments on those analytics in real time, that all you really needed was the development of the transistors and the computing power to get smaller and smaller and more efficient enough to where you could move from having these humongous supercomputers to basically, right, once you could get them mobile, you could have them in someone's hand. You could ostensibly track everything that everybody does all the time. You could facilitate all communications through it. You could facilitate all of your commerce through it. Eventually, you could find ways through biometrics and psychometrics to quantify not just where a person is, and who they're talking to, and what they're doing in a given moment, but you could sort of infer what are they thinking and even what are they feeling. And so that, I mean, from the get-go, right, from the very beginning, that we knew that we could create, you know, the impetus or sort of move towards the trajectory of what would become artificial intelligence. You know, they knew that this would be essentially the end game, or this would be sort of the outcome eventually. And I remember, so you can look at a book like Zbigniew Brzezinski's Between Two Ages, something about the Technotronic era. I forget the whole title, but the main title is Between Two Ages and something about the Technotronic era. And I go through it in my book. But this was 70s, I want to say early 70s. I don't know, maybe it was 68 or 69. It's back there. I might have to roll back there and grab it just to check the date. But late 60s, early 70s, okay? And in there he talks about how eventually, because he's basically forecasting what the future economy globally is going to look like as what he called technotronics, right? Sort of this is sort of the precursor to what's now the fourth industrial revolution, but the convergence of the electrical revolution with the digital revolution, and right, the emergence of the modern computer. That he says that most of your education will be there'll be an integration of private, corporate, business interests in helping to facilitate that there would be integrated increasingly what the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, calls lifelong learning, and that you'd have frequent periods of retraining to be recalibrated for the economy as it evolves into this increasingly digital economy, and that the actual courses themselves would be facilitated through, I forget the phrase he uses. It's not computers, because we're not quite there yet, but it's something like remote technologies through the home. Okay, and this is this is late 60s, early 70s. B.F. Skinner came up with the idea of a teaching machine, an analog teaching machine that could basically track a student into either honors or career pathways or remediation based on operant conditioning algorithm. So basically psychometrics, and this becomes the modern adaptive learning courseware. And then when Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt, she's my mentor, she died last year, February, wrote the foreword to my book, gave me pretty much everything you see back here. I'd say 90+%, maybe 99+% of the books behind me were hers. And there was a story she told me, and I just wished I would have took more notes on some of the names and places and things, because a lot of stories she would tell, repeatedly, and I would always listen, and I'd enjoy listening every single time. It never got old for me. And because of that, though, some of these stories I guess I took for granted that I would always remember them, but now that I try to go back and remember some of the names, I get foggy and can't call her up and ask her. But there was a guy that when she was in the department, I don't want to hazard a name and get it wrong, but there's a couple people I can think of. One of the guys was Arthur Melmed. I don't think it was Arthur. I want to say it was a guy by the name of Malcolm something, but I still am not sure. But she was looking at So this is in the 80s, right? So this had to be between 1980 and 1981, because the 81 was when she leaked Project Basic Education Skills Through Technology, which was this big technology program that set up public-private partnerships between big tech companies and the Department of Education and local schools to integrate computer learning that would utilize the Skinner's operant conditioning algorithms. So sometime during there that she's in the office and she's sort of looking through some of the files and talking with different people about the trajectory of everything, and there was a curriculum, and I remember. She said it was an NEA curriculum, National Education Association. Right? This is the largest teachers union in the United States. I believe it's the largest union period in the United States. This is interesting to note here too, because the NEA is very much a left-wing organization, right? Always votes for the Democratic Party. But this was, right, she was working in the Department of Education under Ronald Reagan, which is obviously, right, this is a Republican right-wing administration. And they were looking at what the NEA had developed was one of the first sort of computerized, it was a math curriculum, she said. And she said something like, "Oh, well, that's kind of neat. Like, you could do that. You wouldn't even need to go to a school for that. You could do that at home." And the guy said, "Charlotte, in the future, all learning will take place in the home." And she told me that story several times, right? She also told me that this I do know was Arthur Melmed. He was one of the assistants to the assistant secretary. So in the Department of Education, right, you have the Secretary of Education. And then you have a bunch of assistant secretaries, and then you have like deputy assistants, and then you have like special advisors and staff. Okay, so Charlotte was a special advisor under Assistant Secretary Donald Sinise, and another, I don't remember what Arthur Melmed's position was, but I got tons of memorandums and stuff from when she was there. What you don't see in here are I think it's six lobster crates, so about yay long, about yay tall, right? If I stack them up, it'd be taller than me in here. And I got a bunch of communications between them. But what Arthur Melmed said, she said when they used to go out to lunch, and she said at the time, I listened, but it didn't really register with me because it just sounded so fantastic. But she said that Arthur Melmed used to go on and on about AI and robots and automation and everything else. And again, this is in the 80s. Right, and so I would say that as much as everybody sort of on the receiving end, on the user end of the technology, basically built the system without knowing it by integrating their lives into it. The people who designed it, the architects, the engineers, they essentially saw the outcome. And if you look at somebody like Ray Kurzweil and his analysis of what's known as the law of accelerating returns and Moore's law, it's this idea of you could calculate sort of this is why Kurzweil has specific dates for these different flashpoints in the evolution of technology leading up to the singularity, which is that you could look at the rate of exponential computing power evolving through the transistor development, right? And so over time, right, you could double the capacity in X amount of time, and then you could double that in about half the time. Then you can double that, right? And you could keep doubling it. And so you could look, right, again, going back to the Macy Cybernetics conferences and say, around 2020-ish, 20,000-ish, right? We're going to get to this sort of flashpoint where we'll be right on the cusp of this singularity that will start from 2030, 2040, right? So there's both of those things going on at the same time.
Yeah. And like I said, man, I don't think that there's any stopping it. When you go shopping, when you go out to restaurants, even whenever you're in your own house, man, and I finally caught myself doing this a couple weeks ago, and I knew I was doing it subconsciously. I knew it was there. I knew it was an issue. And I've always had a problem with it because I've had a cell phone since I was 15, man. So I'm going on 19 years of having a cell phone. I mean, that's my whole adult life. I'm still not a man yet. I'm trying to become a man, and I'm getting better at that. And I've never not been without my phone. It's always been there for me. It's always been there when I needed it. Anytime I need information, it's always been there. So, John, the past, like, I'm going on 2 weeks, man. I've limited myself to cell phone usage to probably under like 20 minutes total each day, minus like texting my wife, you know what I'm saying, or friends and family. And I'll be honest with you, man, like, it's probably one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me. Now, what it's done to me, like to my psychology now, it's just like when I get on my phone and I'm on there and I want to click on the apps that I normally would click on, 2 weeks ago, like I don't even want to do that, man. Like I've lost my touch with it, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm not saying that I won't go back to it or get addicted to it again. I don't want to, but I just feel like, man, technology is not everything. Nature is way more beautiful. There's so much more to offer in life than what this is, you know? And I'm finally seeing it at 34 years old, man. It's just nuts. It's crazy. Even when I turn on a movie, man, and I'm watching a movie, I'm very disinterested. I don't really want to watch it. I'm just like, what's the point? I'm like, I could be outside doing something, you know, that's more productive. But anyways, I mean, you can put some thoughts on that, but I guess through this 10-minute conversation we're having, is the end goal the end of consciousness? Is that kind of what you're seeing happening?
Yeah, I mean, well, I part of me wants to answer your first question, and then
that's fine. That's cool.
Part of me is afraid that I'll forget the second one. So remind me if
will do.
Right, remind me if I can't thread them both together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember when I was in college, and obviously, you know, didn't have a whole lot of money in college, and at one point, what I did was I got rid of my cable subscriptions. I figured, right, I can save whatever it was, I don't know, $70, $100 a month or something. And at first it was kind of, you know, you're used to, because I grew up with constant, you know, video games and TV. And so when I was one of these people that liked to have it on in the background, even if I wasn't watching it, right? Something about that ambient noise, right? Was like, without it, it was, there was like another layer of anxiety, you know, that subsided pretty quickly. And I had a similar experience, which was that you had, which was when I finally would come back home for the, you know, in between semesters, and I did not want to. The TV was like this thing that, like, you know, sort of, I don't want to say hypnotize you, but, you know, I would go home and I'd be like ready to talk to everybody. Oh, I haven't seen anybody, and you'd sit down and, like, instead of, you know, you got the couches in the room that are facing each other, but everyone's facing the TV. And I just remember, like, that being like, you know, if you're not, if you don't remove yourself from it, it just seems like something to do, right? But I just remember feeling like, and there was no way to communicate, like, let's turn this off and just, like, have a conversation. But to your point about the whole devices and sort of the addictive quality, I mean, these are designed, right? I mean, like, I think Facebook has admitted as much, that we don't just engineer these things to be fun and entertaining. Like, we've done the brain science, right, and the operating conditioning, behavioral psychology to know, right, how can we make it addictive, right, in essentially a physiological manner, right? Like, so the dopamine hits that you get from the likes and things like that, or the nature of, right, if you're scrolling, if you want to center a particular post so that you can see the whole thing, you can't do that without seeing, right, the top of the next one, right? And so basically being sort of intrigued, right, by the next one, because, you know, you might think, I'll just look at one more post, and you look at that one, and maybe that one wasn't, maybe you're looking at some funny memes or something. That one wasn't too funny. One more, right? And you know, whatever dopamine triggers you might get from those. It's very much like junk food or a drug or something, to the extent that, right, it's not a sustaining neurotransmitter. It's not like the deferred gratification, right, that you get from completing a long creative project, or a long workout that, right, is building on your stamina and your overall health, right? Whereas, in other words, when the project is completed, right, the neurochemical satisfaction that you get, right, carries on for quite some time, versus, right, the neurotransmitter chemical pleasure that you get from a click or a like is, right, it's over. It's just like candy or a drug or something, right? And the more you do it, the more you need it, and then, right, it almost creates as much uneasiness as it does the pleasure of whatever you get when you see your clicks or your likes. And so I guess you could look at that as part of this idea of the end of consciousness. I mean, it certainly makes the human psyche want to cleave to the device in a way that sort of moves us towards what the transhumanists hope to achieve, which is this essentially the singularity, this merger of human biology with digital technology. And when I believe you're sort of referencing one of the titles of one of the last chapters in the book, and if you sort of, I mean, and I kind of inferred this much before I even really dug deep into the history of AI and sort of the contemporary development, where we're at in that trajectory, and then forecasting into the future. I had just worked for an online tutoring company, and they wanted IBM's Watson to pilot with us, or to co-pilot with us. In other words, this thing's going to data mine what I'm doing, and it's going to come up with some algorithm so that it can do the same thing. And it was at that point that I sort of, kind of extrapolated out into the future and said, okay, now hold on. So not only am I sort of training this thing to replace me, you have to think, right? Most people are sort of concerned that automation, when we think about the automation of the workforce, we largely think about, the types of robots we see in an automotive factory or something, right? And this is the main thing that they throw out there as it's going to be a positive development, right? So you won't have to do all these menial, heavy lifting, hard labor, dangerous types of jobs, right? But don't worry, because, right, the human mind and the human creativity will always have a place. This is just going to get rid of all that sort of mindless, menial, manual labor. Okay, and there's a whole. We could have a whole conversation about the sort of the fallacies and the presuppositions that are ingrained in that notion itself. But it's actually not going with that. We'll just go with that framework for the sake of argument. If you look at something like IBM's Watson replacing the job of a teacher or a tutor, you're talking about the automation of intellectual labor. You're talking about the automation of cognition. Okay, so if IBM's Watson can replace the teacher, not only does the teacher become obsolete, but doesn't the student become obsolete as well? Because if you can train AI to do what the teacher can do in terms of intellectual or cognitive labor, then you could train AI to do whatever the student could do, right? And at that point, right, so at this point, this is where someone like Elon Musk says, well, this is where we need Neuralink, because we need to then integrate or interface with these emerging large language models, right? The sort of the GPT style generative pre-training algorithms, and that that at that point, right? If it works in the way that they purport that it will, essentially you would be sort of having a sort of a Google, right? But sort of an interactive Google that you could sort of call upon, right? In your own consciousness at any point. This would be the only way that you could sort of. He says, if you can't beat it, join it, right? So if AI can do everything more efficiently, well, perhaps if you had sort of like this AI assistant embedded into your own cognition, kind of like the Iron Man suit, I think it's called Jarvis or something, right? Like it gives whatever the character's name is, right? He can enhance his analytics, right? And it can also suggest do this, don't do that type of thing. But at that point, now we're talking about, right, how much of your consciousness is your consciousness, right? I mean, right? So clearly, right, once we've interfaced with these programs, at what point if you could sort of just, build sort of like a pie graph, right? And you could maybe split it down the middle where you're half of your thoughts are yours and half of yours are AI, right? At what point, though, does sort of the eclipse happen in which, right, the bulk of what we consider to be human consciousness or some sort of cognitive process occurring within the brain chemistry is essentially rounded in, or is just an extension of the programming. So at that point, right, if we keep going down this trajectory, you would essentially you could say that it would be, if you wanted to use Kurzweil term, well, we've just evolved into a new consciousness, but this new consciousness would effectively have essentially no resemblance or no sort of remnants of what we understand as human consciousness. At that point, you would be not just transhuman, but the term that's often used, sometimes synonymously, but other times it's thought of as distinct from transhumanism, and that is posthumanism. And the only other time we use that term, the root of that term, is when we say posthumous, right, or posthumous, meaning dead, right? And so at this point, right, that I don't know of any other way to conceive of it as other than the end of consciousness, right? So whether you want to say that it's an evolution into a new consciousness, or just, right, the taking over of an old consciousness, I think is the semantic point, right? And in one way or another, what you understand as human consciousness will be fundamentally inverted or overridden.
Man, that's some deep shit. That's so deep. You really think that Elon Musk is going to be successful with Neuralink? Do you think that he's going to be able to do what you just described, where that they can implant something into your brain to where it can take over half your consciousness, and then do an eclipse to where it eventually consumes what it is and who it is you are as a person? And I don't even think we fully understand consciousness. I mean, I know we've poured billions and billions of dollars into the brain and trying to understand what it is. But even my own self, man, like I don't fully understand myself yet. And I think that's the purpose of life, is to have the journey to figure out who you are. And even most people, when they die, they still don't know who they are. So, and I think a lot of that has to do with Western society, Western culture. I think there are other places on this planet where they have it, in my opinion, more right than we do when it comes to understanding what life is. It's not about consuming. It's about being, I know this is going to sound hippie of me, but it's to be with nature, to be with your loved ones, find your soulmate, experience life with that person, those types of things. You know what I'm saying, John? So it's like, and it's scary, man, at that point. And I know you talk about like or transhumanism or post-humans, but it's like, I don't think that this is a natural progression for human beings for evolution. And I don't necessarily know if there is an evolution for humans. Over time, we evolve into something else than what we are now. But technology is not, or the fourth industrial revolution is not a good thing for human beings.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. A few lights went off. I'm trying to figure out which one I should start with, and try to touch on all of them. Let's just. I guess I'll just start anywhere. Um, so as far as will they? Do I think they could? Well, I think the theory of the apex of the evolution of AI in the interface, or the merger of the human brain with the AI. Do I think that it could ever get to this point that I just described in the sort of like Jarvis example? I sometimes I don't know how much they believe their own hype. Sometimes I wonder if a lot of it is hype just to sort of have us so in awe of the magical powers of their all-seeing, all-knowing technology that we will willingly interface with it, right? Not just to be whether it be for the sake of, oh, well, you'll have all this extra brain power, or, as some of these people think that, well, you could maybe one day, if we track all your thoughts and we scan your brain with your brain computer interface, well, we could copy your consciousness and you could live forever in the computer. And this is something that people like Ray Kurzweil talk about. Do I think that they really believe that if you did that whatever they copied into a program, even if through robotics or synthetic biology, or just like as an avatar in virtual reality, if it looked exactly like me and had all the mannerisms that I have, it could match my inflection and my intonation and all of the idiosyncrasies and nuances in there in such a way that it appears to be conscious. I personally think that it would actually just be like a really, really complex GIF, right? Those images, the GIF images that, right? Typically it's doing one motion, one or two motions, right? On a loop, right? So take that and then now add another motion to it, and add another one, and add another one, and keep adding them and adding them and adding them. And then for each of those, maybe it has an arm movement, maybe it has a leg movement, and then take the arm movement and break that down into all the different arm movements, and then break that down into, right, I've got my fingers here, I've got my fingers here, I've got my finger, right, all the little nuances you could have, right, all the different, in other words, you would have this expansive set of sort of boilerplate pre-programmed responses, but it could pick and choose from those pre-programmed responses based on its scanning of your own, who or whatever it's interacting with, right? Based on reading the facial expression, maybe based on reading the EEGs or the heart rate, or just responding to the language that you're presenting to it, that it could pick from this huge array of pre-programmed responses in such a way that it seems organic, that it seems natural, that it seems like you never noticed the same response, because there was just enough nuance to seem like, right, what a human being does, which is never perfect, right? Like I think of, if you ever make any music, if you've ever done live music, and then you've done electronic music with like an MPC. Shows you how old I am, I guess, because those are probably, probably few people use an MPC anymore. But if you use an MPC and you use the timing correct for the drum kit, right, the drums are perfectly on whether it be the quarter note or the half note or the eighth note, right, in whatever time signature you're using. Versus if you do a live band, right, you're never perfectly on it. You can get pretty close, but you're never perfectly on it, right? And that has, if for someone that's, right, studied music, listened to a lot of it, and messed with both, you can hear it, right, just subtly, right? But for somebody that grew up with nothing but interacting with virtual mediums, avatars, AI, talking to, having conversations with Chat GPT, they have They have a Moxie robot now, it's for kids. It's supposed to help with social emotional learning. It's designed by people from Pixar and Jim Henson Studios. So it's a cute little machine elf looking thing. But the kids can literally, like, it'll, give them hugs, and you can talk to it, right? If you grew up, right, interacting with that type of, we'll just say, humanoid AI, whereas perhaps maybe somebody that grew up actually interacting with, right, flesh and blood humans might be able to notice, right, like, I can see, right, just like you can hear it, the difference between the electronic music and the orchestral music. But if you grew up in it, you wouldn't really notice it. Now, you would never know whether the thing is conscious, because if you asked it and it told you, right, you just have to take your word for it. The only way you would ever know if it's conscious is if you yourself had your brain scanned and put in there, and then, right, you being in the machine might know that, but anybody that hasn't gone through that process isn't going to be able to verify that based on your testimony, right? Like, if you think of, and this sort of gets to what you're saying about the nature of consciousness, right? Like, for the AI technocrat, they have to be able to reduce consciousness to algorithms, right? To cognitive, verbal, kinesthetic, emotional responses to various environmental stimuli, in order to break it down into sort of if-then programming loops, right? If this stimulus is encountered by the AI, then the AI produces this response in any of those given categories, or a combination of, right? So cognitive, emotional, or kinesthetic. And if you think of, so if you go to the doctor, right, and they got and they want to know how much pain you're in, technically you could put like a sensor on there, right? And you could see nerve activity. Okay, but for one person, the nerve activity might not be as painful as the other person, right? In other words, if you graphed it on a computer, the spike that shows up, one person might say ow when the spike is halfway to the top. Some people might not say ow until it's all the way up at the top. I've got some problems with my hands from that dummy there, which is, a lot of times I'll mess with it and I don't put it's called dip that jowl. You're supposed to, it's a liniment so that you don't get calcium deposits and stuff like that. And most of the time I just, whatever, I walk past it and I start messing with it. Next thing you know, I'm on it for 10 minutes. And so I've got some knots in here. And before lockdowns, I had a friend at the gym, massage therapist, and he would, basically grind this knot out that I have in my hand. And he would always say, he's like, you got a really strong pain tolerance, because most people, like, I know I can feel the knot. I know it hurts. Like, he's like, most people would be telling me to stop. I'm telling them, like, get it, get it out of there. I was like, so the only way, that's why when you go to the doctor, it's got the, 1 to 10 smiley face, sad face. Right? The only way they're going to know whether or not something hurts is if you tell them, right? Like, in other words, there's ways you could measure the neural activity, but that doesn't actually tell them if it hurts, right? That state of consciousness, right? In the same way with the programming, right? If you were to upload your stuff, like, I don't know that you would ever know. And I don't know that they would ever know, but if I'm able to think that, unless they have a totally nihilistic outlook on what is consciousness and what is the human species, which I would surmise that they do, you would have to actually probably lean towards no, it would never be conscious, and then you would guess that the hype around that is nothing more than to get you to want to interface with it and integrate with it, so that you're not left behind, right? And so I think in the early stages. Right now, the brain-computer interface, the main uses are for, like, Parkinson's syndrome, epilepsy. I think they've got some that you can use for people that are paralytic, so that they can read and write on a computer. I think they might even have some that can bypass You can hook it. You can get some limited range of motion in limbs, so they can bypass the severed point in the spine and then run the brain signal into the limb. But as far as like enhancing cognition, I don't think we're very close to that yet. I would think that the first steps would basically be something like, it would just be like an autocorrect, like you have on a phone or an email. And so, right, this thing might just kind of suggest things if you're kind of stuck in your thoughts, or if you're wanting to look up an answer to a question, maybe you could, right, it could give you an auto suggestion or something like that. That's what I would guess. I wouldn't think that it would be necessarily, almost like a second entity living in there. But if you look at, if you hear people like, Joe Rogan has talked about this a few times. He seems to be pretty excited about a lot of the brain-computer interface stuff. And he suggested one time, he's like, well, with the right type of technologies, brain-computer interface, we could basically be telepathic. And Elon Musk has even said that, right? That eventually the interface between AI and the brain, the language as we know it, right? Textual written language, perhaps even verbal language, would become obsolete. And this sort of dovetails or overlaps with what Rogan speculates, is that you'd basically be able to, it's like telepathy. And he was like, instead of me trying to use these words that are imprecise and then you trying to figure out what I mean, and then sometimes us miscommunicating, and maybe the social friction that happens from that could be bypassed, because you would just know what I intend. You would know what I mean. And just, again, back to your point about sort of what I would consider the spiritual or metaphysical nature or essence of consciousness, which is not algorithmic. In many ways, I mean, for lack of a better word, as much as we can infer things about it, it's going to be ultimately ineffable because of that nature. But that is that I don't think that's ever achievable either, because anybody that spent a lot of time thinking about anything, if you spend a lot of time in a state of introspection, you will notice that oftentimes you don't know what you're trying to say until after you've said it and then thought about what you've said and then corrected it. Or sometimes you don't even get that far, right? If you really quiet the mind as much as possible and you look within, there's not a one thought there, right? That inner monologue is oftentimes juggling 2 or 3 different things, right? What am I going to wear today? What am I going to eat today, right? It's not just this linear, right, stimulus response thing. And it's somewhere, I think, in between, right, all these different perspectives that we can entertain, all the different stimuli that we can process, that there is a core or an essence to what is consciousness, what is the soul, what is the human being, that will never be reducible to an algorithm, and to try to do so would necessarily, you would have to know whether successfully or not, whether for better or for worse, would ultimately have to be essentially the end of consciousness. It would have to be an outcome in which that thing, however ineffable, that is the core of the soul and consciousness, would be totally replaced by this sort of this ubiquity of stimulus response algorithms. And if you were to follow that trajectory intentionally, I would have to again assume that you're a nihilist, and that whether it's your intention to effectively wipe out the consciousness, the soul, the human condition as we know it, whether it's your intention or not, you would have to know that that would be the outcome. And so whether you're essentially a nihilist, just a meaningless, have a meaningless outlook, and you just want to pursue the novelty of this new technology just to see where it goes, or you actively want to essentially destroy, overwrite, erase humanity itself, is sort of, again, a semantic point to me.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you, man.
Yeah,
It's deep, right deep shit, John. But at the end of the hour, man. So I got to get to it. I got to work tonight. I got to sling some drinks and bartend.
2 hours, dude. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, they got to get the kids ready and all that good stuff. So I'm down to do another podcast, man, here soon if you have time. I know you're probably busy, but I miss talking to you, man, and there's just a lot more that needs to be said, dude. I wanted to get into Skull and Bones today. I wanted to do that in the first podcast I ever did with you. Neither time did we get into that, man. So I'd love to have you back on soon to talk about that.
Yeah, I'll leave you with this. So next time, if you want to do it another time, these are the physical catalogs. I've got a document cam, but I'm not gonna bother to click on it. These are the actual catalogs that Charlotte gave me. Like I said, she gave me her life's work. So. But these are the physicals, right? These are the actual books that she gave Anthony Sutton that he used to do all his research on the Order of Skull and Bones. So.
Dude, yeah.
So anytime.
I would love to, man. I'll reach out to you in an email here in the next couple weeks. Again, man, I just whenever you have time. So I'll email you. We'll pick out a date and time soon. And next podcast, man, it's strictly Skull and Bones.
All right, sounds good, man.
Rock on. So where can people find you? I know you say you don't upload a lot anymore, but where can people find you, find your book? I'll put the links all down below. I don't know if you have any plugs or anything that you wanted to do.
Main place is just go to schoolworldorder.info, and then it's got all my social media on there. All my articles, most of my interviews. I'm slow on updating and uploading. If you want to contact me, the best way to contact me is always through email. If you try to get a hold of me through Telegram or Twitter, I'm probably going to take longer because I'm not on those every day. But my email I check every day. So if you want to get a hold of me, that's how to do it. And like I said, everything is there on schoolworldorder.info.
John, man, I appreciate you, brother. You have a good one.
You too, buddy.
Cheers.